I coughed, and Carla's been exposed. And then Janet, you know, she's not on top of her game. So I think we're just going to have to wait.
Hi.
And Leanne. I think we're just going to have to wait until people get to know us.
Here, I have to come out.
Thank you. It's hard.
Hi, Jen.
Well, you good morning. How are you this morning?
I'll be back. I want to hear some more.
Hi, Jen. Hi.
Morning, Sharon.
Good morning.
Good morning. There's actually certification. How you doing? Yes, that's great.
Good morning.
Going through that with Tara.
Yes, sir, ma'am.
Oh, I'm like, what are we talking about there? Good, thank you.
I know I should have called, but the things are something else.
Well, now she has to take chemo pills because,
How are you this morning? Sort of a nice day.
So now she has to
It was over the 30-degree mark, so I feel like that's huge.
Almost a heat wave.
I know.
really, and then she will stop the chemo pills when she's like.
I'm not a big winter person.
And then when she's
I don't like when you put single digits, nothing.
So we've got this.
I wanted to be on the East Coast. I like winter, so I wanted to be over there for the blizzards that they got the other day.
I like the snow. Like, I like the snow, and it's just when it's so hot that I have to change the water thing in the house multiple times a day.
Yeah.
That's what we can buy, so I don't want to do it.
He's really sick. I talked to him a day or two later. No, I'm getting too old for that.
Yeah, he's not sitting out there on a bucket just
He
fishing.
might be sitting on ice,
Yeah,
but he's not.
he's got a shanty. He's probably got a heater in there.
Yeah. He got TV and
Yeah.
whatever.
You seen Grumpy Old Men? Have you seen that movie, Grumpy Old Men? They're old guys up in Minnesota, and of course all winter they ice fish. Well, they have shanties, they have TV and all that.
Couches and all
Yeah. Yeah.
morning, the 29th. It's a little cool, but the sun's shining and all that, so hey, it's
I
a
don't
good day.
have, I mean, all I had was what he just said.
Let us hope with.
Well, but if I do, I do, but I put it on
Our
the
Heavenly
23rd,
Father,
because that's what
we
he just
thank
said.
thee
So,
for this gathering this morning.
What is the
We
last
thank thee for
Wednesday
this
of the
beautiful
month?
day.
the last Wednesday of the month.
We thank you for the successful dinner we had Wednesday night.
Yeah.
Great turnout and good to see everyone. We ask that you be with us as we move forward this week and help us to be good Christians. In thy name we pray. Amen. I understand our pianist has a choice, so I suppose we should honor that choice.
Well, and he's coming.
Yeah, he's coming.
Outside
I,
the church.
this week, I watched YouTube more. I didn't know about it. I normally watch farming videos. And if you're not in farming, you wouldn't like it, but I do. But I also watched some Southern Baptist gospel songs. And I like them. The reason I do is they sing the old time gospel songs. And the Baptists can sing. So it's been good to watch those and enjoy those. So our song this morning, as requested, 670, Make Me a Blessing. 670.
Sunshine where darkness is bright. Make me
minutes and read those around you.
Food guy.
Morning.
You're by
How are the
yourself.
squids?
Good morning.
Yep.
She's with Dad.
But weather's not beating up on her or anything.
Morning. Good.
Morning, Toby.
Oh, okay. I'm like, thank you.
You have a big sound?
Yeah, we had to stay for all others.
Morning, Bill.
Morning, hold on.
To be at an assembly, guys. We bought it. We actually bought it.
Morning.
She would be a star. Have you got your call yet?
Well, at least you don't have to.
That's right, we're
like,
kids.
I assume you don't have to do it. You have to.
Be careful.
You know,
Careful.
oh, today is
Overall,
when
it's a
you
little
do
less.
yours. I'm gonna go up and get my bills and I'll come and take that because
Perhaps the live auction, mega sale ring, and get people getting those big sale. So, planning the prep, I think on the actual night of the event. So I think on the actual night of the event.
no, this is all we can.
He's gonna have a.
And our good homes will be fine.
I know it.
I'm wondering about those that are typically like, well, we go on spring break in March. None of them, I don't know where they're gonna
David?
show. They're both part of the business, but we had to. You gotta know what your goal is. You gotta towards it, right? For us, to try to kind of make these state fairs, this is what we do. I just hope you don't lose a lot of work. Like before, I mean, most of that stuff is so solid. You know, I think, and we don't have, last year we only had 90, we've only got 80. Couple of total, last year, not, it's three-legged deal. So, and I think it's gonna be transition and stuff like that. And my guess is, depending on the count of other events, next year we would move.
I think we're gonna get more money out of it.
Just, I don't know, it's a lot of changes.
Yeah.
But they need it. Need to change.
There you go.
You think everybody's going back to 94?
I think I wanna sit back here in the popular crowd.
Alright, we're back here trying to stay in trouble.
Yeah, that's why you're back in the corner.
Yeah, some things never change with age.
I don't think it's popular. This is why we're back here.
David, we have, 2 birthdays.
Well, are there any birthdays tonight?
Yeah. This is for, I'm Nathan, and Toby's Agnes.
Okay.
So hang on tight, buddy.
So we're getting a lot of money today.
Okay.
Many happy returns
on the day that I heard. May sunshine and guidance be given, and may the dear Father prepare me on earth for a beautiful birthday.
What do you have to be a stand-in?
Not much.
It's gonna take a while.
How old is Aggie? 94? 94.
94.
Money in for hat for clothes.
Well, it didn't change. Okay. Okay, well, it's good to have 2 birthdays. Now it's that time when we have a congregational choice.
Something easy to play.
We have veto power.
What do you want to play, Hugh?
Yeah, I'm going, I chose the first one. I
Okay.
chose the second one. Unless nobody has one.
Well, I picked out 2 earlier.
We have a story to tell to the nations, 446.
446. 446.
not good. Q's scrambling looking for it up there. It's gonna be good.
And if it's not good, we'll do something else.
We may be back there if you're happy and you know it. It's okay, Hugh. We're thankful.
I think I can get through this one. Let me figure out how I'm supposed to do the interaction.
Great.
Andy, good job. Well, it's time for prayer requests. And I've made up the list from the past, and I had one to read this morning, if I can find it here. Okay, Daniel Stoic. Daniel had heart surgery here, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I text Bobby this morning and asked how he's doing and hear his response. Thanks for asking. He starts therapy soon and goes to the doctor appointment this week. So hopefully less restrictions. So he's making progress. And good news, Jason Searcy, Barbara Jane.
He's off the ventilator.
Oh, really?
And for those of you that don't know Jason, maybe 2 weeks ago, the doctor told the family, only a miracle would he come off the ventilator. Only with a miracle. That's what prayer does.
So we had a miracle.
We absolutely had a miracle.
And I see from last Sunday, the Watson family, VA is,
Yeah, I think Steve's last treatment is Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday, and so he'll be done with treatments, and they've seen progress, and his tumor on his pancreas has shrank, and they think it's you know, to this point, without really going in after the last treatment, they think favorable progress has been made.
okay, so good.
Yeah.
And Bill and Nancy, we're glad you're here this morning. And Bill, thank you for bringing the message last Sunday.
My pleasure.
Janet starts around the chemo tomorrow, I think.
Yeah.
And it's an at-home situation, so she doesn't have to go for infusions. And then she'll start radiation at some point. So prayers with Janet. Prayers on prayer list, Leanne, anybody, any update on Leanne?
They have COVID. Leanne and Chris have COVID.
Oh, they had COVID.
Uh-huh.
And then Virginia's relatives, John and Elvina.
And she also wants to put Pam on there with John.
And Virginia,
She has a scratchy throat and a cough, so.
and had Mickey's healing, he had surgery or something?
He has had, yes,
Yes.
but he's home.
Okay. Others to add to the list.
Well, praises again for our dinner the other night. There were 43 people
43.
here, and I went back and what I could remember, there were 14 of us who usually come to church. So we had a really good turnout from around the community, thanks to Jesse and everybody else's hard work.
Greg?
So I have a coworker, her name is Tia, and we just found out she is leaving work, but she's leaving work because her husband has cancer, and they've been battling it for 6 or 7 months, and she said that they just got some bad news, and so she's leaving work to just concentrate on family stuff, so just be with their family.
Okay. Others?
So did you put Virginia on there?
Somewhat praises and prayers for one person in particular. My sister-in-law has given up her will to live. They still don't know exactly a diagnosis. But anyway, Ben and Tori have been going through her house, and they found a box full of pictures of my brothers. Our Lake Heart, the place on 12th Street, the new Cedar House, all of them. And they had been, a mouse had got into them and ruined a bunch, but they still saved a bunch. And I went out eating with them yesterday and got to see them, and was telling them more about some of those pictures than they were, and just tickled them to pieces.
Okay.
They found those pictures.
Yes. Even though they weren't in the best of condition, it was good to bring back memories.
And Tori's got some gaps filled, a lot of gaps filled in,
Okay.
which is good. I'm glad to have that for her to know that.
Bill?
Yeah, Gary.
Dave, I have a friend, well, we have a friend, Pete Hannebett's family needs our prayers. Pete Hannebett needs our prayers. They're the family.
Others? I also have first responders, law enforcement, rural leaders, healthcare workers, and a prayer for decrease in COVID. Are there others? Greg?
I've got one more. His name's Austin. It's a former student of Maria's, and he's older now. He was one of the first kids that she ever taught, and he's one of her favorites, and he's just having a hard time, needs some guidance. So
Others?
Dave, I have some friends up north. She lost her mom this week. Her last name is Shear. And I think the Hensel family, there's still quite a bit of transition happening there. And I think, although it's been a month that Sam's gone, that's tough. I remember Mom told me when she lost her mother, she said, there's so much stuff happening in the moment. You're overwhelmed and tired. She says, then everybody kind of goes back to life. And she said, maybe it's 2 weeks later when you're by yourself having breakfast or something that, those things really set in.
Others? We got a good list this morning. Jason Searcy, prayer to them. Jason Searcy and his family, he's off the ventilator. Daniel Stovic, because he makes progress from heart surgery. The Watson family, they deal with cancer and waiting on a further prognosis. For Janet and her cancer treatment. Bill and Nancy for their health. Leanne and Chris for COVID. John and Pam, Albina, Mickey's healing. Praises for the church dinner we had, an amazing turnout. Greg's co-worker, whose husband has cancer. Virginia, Sharon's sister-in-law and her will to live, and for the found family photos. For Gary Sutton, for Pete Hannibal family, for Maria's former student, Austin, for VA's friends, and the last name is Shear, that she lost her mom, and for continued prayers with the Hensel family. And we ask, Lord, just be with all those that are on our prayer list. But we know there are many others. And as evidenced this morning, we know that prayer heals. So we ask that you continue to be with those on all of our prayer lists, and just be with all of us. In thy name we pray. Amen. Greg has our sharing time this morning. And after Greg is done with sharing time, Hugh's going to bring the message. So you, whenever you deem appropriate, you just come on up.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Greg.
So my story, it's a Christmas story, but I figure it's still winter, so it's still fitting, and it's a very good message. So this is something that Brian and Nathan and Tim and Doug and I, we kind of, one of us sends it to the group, around every Christmas, right before every Christmas. It's a really good story. So hopefully I can make it through, because it can get pretty emotional. But Pa never had much compassion for the lazy or those who squandered their means and then never had enough for the necessities. But for those who were genuinely in need, his heart was as big as all outdoors. It was from him that I learned the greatest joy in life comes from giving, not from receiving. It was Christmas Eve, 1881. I was 15 years old and feeling like the world had caved in on me because there just hadn't been enough money to buy me the rifle that I had wanted for Christmas. We did the chores early that night for some reason. I just figured Pa wanted a little extra time so we could read in the Bible. After supper was over, I took my boots off and stretched out in front of the fireplace and waited for Pa to get down the old Bible. I was still feeling sorry for myself, and to be honest, I wasn't in much of a mood to read scriptures. But Pa didn't get the Bible. Instead, he bundled up again and went outside. I couldn't figure it out because we had already done all the chores. I didn't worry about it long, though. I was too busy wallowing in self-pity. Soon, Pa came back in. It was a cold, clear night out, and there was ice in his beard. "Come on, Matt," he said. "Bundle up good. It's cold out tonight." I was really upset then. Not only wasn't I getting the rifle for Christmas, now Pa was dragging me out in the cold and for no earthly reason that I could see. We'd already done all the chores, and I couldn't think of anything else that needed doing, especially not on a night like this. But I knew Pa was not very patient at one dragging one's feet when he told them to do something. So I got up, put my boots back on, and got my cap, coat, and mittens. Ma gave me a mysterious smile as I opened the door to leave the house. Something was up, but I didn't know what. Outside, I became even more dismayed. There in front of the house was the work team, already hitched to the big sled. Whatever it was we were doing, it wasn't going to be a short, quick little job. I could tell. We never hitched up this sled unless we were going to haul a big load. Pa was already up on the seat, reins in hand. I reluctantly climbed up beside him. The cold was already biting at me. I wasn't happy. When I was on, Pa pulled the sled around the house and stopped in front of the woodshed. He got off and I followed. "I think we'll put on the high sideboards," he said. "Here, help me." The high sideboards. It had been a bigger job than I wanted to do with just the low sideboards on. But whatever it was we were going to do would be a lot bigger with the high sideboards on. After we had exchanged the sideboards, Pa went into the woodshed and came out with an armload of wood. The wood I'd spent all summer hauling down from the mountain and then all fall sawing into blocks and splitting. What was he doing? Finally I said something. "Pa," I asked, "what are you doing?" "You been by the widow Jensen's lately?" he asked. The widow Jensen lived about 2 miles down the road. Her husband had died a year or so before and left her with 3 children, the oldest being 8. "Sure, I'd been by, but so what?" "Yeah," I said, "why?" "I rode by just today," Pa said. "Little Jakey was out digging around in the wood pile trying to find a few chips. They are out of wood, Matt." That was all he said, and then he turned and went back into the woodshed for another armload of wood. I followed him. We loaded the sled so high that I began to wonder if the horses would even be able to pull it. Finally, Pa called a halt to our loading. Then we went to the smokehouse, and Pa took down a big ham and a side of bacon. He handed them to me and told me to put them in the sled and wait. When he returned, he was carrying a sack of flour over his right shoulder and a smaller sack of something in his left hand. "What's in the little sack?" I asked. "Shoes. They're out of shoes. Little Jakey just had Gunny's sacks wrapped around his feet when he was out in the wood pile this morning. I got the children a little candy too. Just wouldn't be Christmas without a little candy." We rode the 2 miles to Widow Jensen's pretty much in silence. I tried to think through what Pa was doing. We didn't have much by worldly standards. Of course, we did have a big wood pile. Though most of what was left now was still in the form of logs that I would have to saw into blocks and split before we could use it. We also had meat and flour, so we could spare that, but I knew we didn't have any money. So why was Pa buying them shoes and candy? Really, why was he doing any of this? Widow Jensen had closer neighbors than us. It shouldn't have been our concern. We came in from the blind side of the Jensen house and unloaded the wood as quietly as possible. Then we took the meat and flour and shoes to the door. We knocked. The door opened a crack and a timid voice said, "Who is it?" "Lucas Miles, ma'am, and my son Matt. Could we come in for a bit?" Widow Jensen opened the door and let us in. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The children were wrapped in another and were sitting in front of the fireplace by a very small fire that hardly gave off any heat at all. Widow Jensen fumbled with a match and finally lit the lamp. "We brought you a few things, ma'am," Pa said, and set down the sack of flour. I put the meat on the table. Then Pa handed her the sack that had the shoes in it. She opened it hesitantly and took the shoes out one pair at a time. There was a pair for her and one for each of the children. Sturdy shoes, the best shoes that would last. I watched her carefully. She bit her lower lip to keep it from trembling, and then tears filled her eyes and started running down her cheeks. She looked up at Pa like she wanted to say something, but it wouldn't come out. "We brought a load of wood too, ma'am," Pa said. He turned to me and said, "Matt, go bring in enough to last a while. Let's get that fire up to size and heat this place up." I wasn't the same person when I went back out to bring in the wood. I had a big lump in my throat, and as much as I hate to admit it, there were tears in my eyes too. In my mind, I kept seeing those 3 kids huddled around the fireplace, and their mother standing there with tears running down her cheeks, with so much gratitude in her heart. My heart swelled within me, and a joy that I had never known before filled my soul. I had given at Christmas many times before, but never when it had made so much difference. I could see we were literally saving the lives of these people. I soon had the fire blazing and everyone's spirits soared. The kids started giggling. The kids started giggling when Pa handed them each a piece of candy, and Widow Jensen looked on with a smile that probably hadn't crossed her face for a long time. She finally turned to us. God bless you, she said. I know the Lord has saved you. The children and I have been praying that he will send one of his angels to spare us. In spite of myself, the lump returned to my throat and the tears welled up in my eyes again. I never thought of Pa in those exact terms before, but after Widow Jensen mentioned it, I could see that it was probably true. I was sure that a better man than Pa had never walked the earth. I started remembering all the times he had gone out of his way for Ma and me and many others. The list seemed endless as I thought on it. Pa insisted that everyone try on the shoes before we left. I was amazed when they all fit, and I wondered how he had known what sizes to get. Then I guessed that if he was on an errand for the Lord, that the Lord would make sure he got the right sizes. Tears were running down Widow Jensen's face again when we stood up to leave. Pa took each of the kids in his big arms and gave them a hug. They clung to him and didn't want us to go. I could see that they missed their Pa, and I was glad that I still had mine. At the door, Pa turned to Widow Jensen and said, "The missus wanted me to invite the children and you over for Christmas dinner tomorrow. Turkey will be more than the three of us can eat, and a man can get cantankerous if he has to eat turkey for too many meals. We'll be by to get you about 11. It'll be nice to have some little ones around again. Matt here hasn't been little for quite a spell. I was the youngest. My 2 brothers and 2 sisters had all married and had moved away." Widow Jensen nodded and said, "Thank you, Brother Miles. I don't have to say, may the Lord bless you. I know for certain that he will." Out on the sled, I felt a warmth that came from deep within, and I didn't even notice the cold. When we had gone a ways, Pa turned to me and said, "Matt, I want you to know something. Your mom and me had been tucking a little money away here and there all year so we could buy that rifle for you, but we didn't have quite enough. Then yesterday, a man owed me a little money from years back, came by to make things square. Your mom and me were real excited, thinking that now we could get you that rifle. And I started into town this morning to do just that, but on the way I saw little Jakey out scratching in the wood pile with his feet wrapped in those gunny sacks, and I knew what I had to do. So son, I spent the money for shoes and a little candy for those children. I hope you understand." I understood, and my eyes became wet with tears again. I understood very well, and I was so glad Pa had done it. Now the rifle seemed very low on my list of priorities. Pa had given me a lot more. He had given me the look on Widow Jensen's face and the radiant smiles of her 3 children. For the rest of my life, whenever I saw any of the Jensens or split a block of wood, I remembered, and remembering brought back that same joy I felt riding home beside Pa that night. Pa had given me much more than a rifle that night. He had given me the best Christmas of my life. And my scripture is from Proverbs 31, verses 8 and 9. "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy."
against him for the lesson this morning too, because this is sort of all related. It's always interesting when things fall together like that. And before I start, I also want to say that you were all saved this morning by my wife, who edited what I was going to say. Made it much better than what I had originally planned. So this is sort of something we did together. I'm going to start off by reading a section from 1 Corinthians 1:10 through 17. I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree with one another in what you say, and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly united in mind and thought. My brothers and sisters, some from Chloe's household, have informed me that there are quarrels among you. What I mean is this. One of you say, I follow Paul. Another, I follow Apollo. Another, I follow Cephas. And still another, I follow Christ. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Were you baptized in the name of Paul? Thank God that I did not baptize any of you except Crispus and Gaius, so no one can say that they were baptized in my name. Yes, I also baptized the household of Stephanus, I think. Beyond that, I don't remember if I baptized anyone else. For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with wisdom and eloquence, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. I find some solace in these verses to know that quarreling and arguing and disputes and competitions was occurring in the very earliest part of the church. And in fact, in many of Paul's letters, he's sort of trying to deal with that in different ways and find some solution to it. I should say that often Squirrel and I talk about the conflicts. You know, in the animal world, there's conflicts between birds over feeders and squirrels over acorns and dogs chasing every other animal. And most certainly, in my own life, there's a huge number of divisions. But this, I don't want to focus on a squirrel story today because I want to tell another story. Now, not that any of my squirrel stories were not truthful, but sometimes they may not have been exactly factual, but I hope they were truthful. But this is a true story. And I sort of wanted to tell this story because I just found it so inspiring that we're going to have to get through some stuff to get to the inspiring part. It's from a book by Robert Jones called White Too Long. And in it, Jones is talking about what it takes to make things better in communities, as a nation, and those sort of things. And part of his point is that it's a whole lot harder than we make it out to be. It's not just a question of being civil. So let me tell you about these two churches. This is in Macon, Georgia. Initially, there was one Baptist church. Initially there was one Baptist church, but there later became two Baptist churches, and I'll explain that to you later. But they're within sight of each other. You can see the steeples together. And in the latter years, they really had nothing to do with each other. They had their history, though, started from one church. It was started in 1826 by slave owners. And until the 1840s, the slave owners sat in the front, the enslaved people sat in the back. And there really wasn't much interaction there, even though they were in the same building. But in the 1840s, there were many more enslaved people than there were slave owners attending the church. It was something like 400 to 100. So the slave owners decided to build a church for the enslaved people, which they did, which became this second church. But true to how things were operating, they appointed the minister, who was a white minister, reviewed the sermons, and maintained control over this second church. After the Civil War, the churches sort of went their separate ways. and didn't have much connection at all. In fact, really just stayed completely separate, even though they're both Baptist churches within a block of each other. This continued to 2014, when the two pastors met through a mutual friend. Those pastors, Reverend Scott Dickinson and Reverend James Goolsby. And they in turn connected with a group founded by Jimmy Carter that goal was to heal black and white Baptist churches and work together to bring the churches together and work for social justice. Well, the two ministers thought this was a good idea, and they were sort of thinking how to do it. So they started off with good Christian method of having potluck dinners together. The base and foundation of all Christianity, I think. So they would have these potluck dinners for a while. They had mutual egg hunts. They were trying to build this foundation of trust between the two different churches. But they had bumps in the road. And both ministers were felt very strongly they had to go very slowly, that this was not a fast process. The first big bump they had is that the predominantly white church, their youth group asked the youth from the predominantly black church to go on a retreat together. And they had, sign-ups for it and all. None of the black youth signed up for it. So they had a meeting to discuss why. Well, this was shortly after Trayvon Martin was killed in Florida. And the retreat was going to be held close to there. So the black kids were scared to go. Black parents were scared to let them go. And it's interesting how this got resolved. The predominantly white church had the local prosecutor in the congregation. And he went to the black church and took personal responsibility to get every kid back safely. Then he would go. And so they had their integrated church retreat for the youth, and it was successful. Once again, building trust and creating a sense of community between the two churches. So they continued, and I guess that they had lots of dinners together. That really truly was sort of the core thing that they were doing to create trust, breaking bread together. A long tradition of Christianity. They had a joint service, a Pentecostal Sunday in 2015. They had communion together, even though that brought a bump because how they did communion was so different, even though they were both Baptist church. Now, as Quakers, we don't have to worry about that much, except trying to explain to people that we do have communion. But I guess the predominantly black church is very formal. What is, I guess, would be deacons wear white gloves. The predominantly white church is a much more informal process. But they worked it out so they could have this joint service for Pentecost and have communion at it. Once again, things got better. Then the Charleston Massacre happened shortly after that, where Dylan Roof went into a church in Charleston, South Carolina, and a group of people were having a Bible study, and he massacred them. And this brought up a lot of issues between the two churches. Obviously, from the predominantly black church, the fears that come with that sort of an act by somebody. For the predominantly white church, there was the issue that the shooter, Dylan Roof, was a Christian nationalist who justified his massacre biblically. Which, is a distortion, but it's still something we need to think about and understand how that happens. But once again, they returned and they began to build trust. And they just kept working at it. Then the next bump, and this is a real interesting one. Some of the members of the predominantly white church were doing some research on the church. And they were looking at the initial building, the building of the their church, the building church, and they found receipts for the sale of 2 teenage young men for $950 each to fund the building of the building. Then they explored it further and found evidence that there was 20 other individuals sold. So, and this is a church that when it was built, there was newspaper stories about the architecture, the beauty of it. But yet, it was built based on splitting up families and selling people. They even found a sermon by the then minister in 1861, once again defending enslavement, that was so popular it became a book. But they persevered on. They faced it, they discussed it, and they persevered on. So over 4 years, they felt like they had really progressed. I don't know if solved ever the word you want to use on these sort of issues, because there's always more work to do. But they decided at that point, because of the trust, that they would, as a joint venture, go to the National Museum for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, which has a memorial for lynching victims. And to sort of understand the story, I need to describe a little bit. Now, I have not been there, so I spent time looking at pictures and reading about this memorial. The memorial sort of sits on a hill, and as you come up to it at eye level, there's all these metal columns with all the names of the known people who had been lynched. There's 800 of these metal columns because there's 800 counties where lynchings occurred in the United States. And there's 4,400 names on these. And then as you enter the memorial, you actually go down until you're sitting underneath these hanging metal, I guess they're rectangular, so that you're literally underneath them hanging. And so, this, I'm just going to read from the book because I think the book captures it so well. During the visit, one particular moving moment happened between Tim, an African-American man, and Kathy, a white woman. As Kathy descended to the building's deepest point, where the rectangular and steel county memorial columns to lynching victims become suspended overhead, she felt emotionally overwhelmed and sat down on a bench to collect her thoughts. Tim, who had just encountered the list of names inscribed on the columns representing the county in which he grew up, caught her eye. He sat down next to Kathy without a word, and the tears came for both of them. At a reflection service after the trip, Kathy summed up the simple but powerful moment. We sat and shed tears together, neither of us completely knowing or understanding the source of those tears, but we were there for each other. The racial complexity of this moment, however, was thick for Tim. He let her confess to Kathy that he couldn't help but think about what the evidence all around them demonstrated. That the simple physical proximity of a white woman and a black man was precisely the catalyst for the torture and murder of many a black man remembered in the columns suspended above them. You know, when I went through this, it inspires me because there's such joy in the fact that they're working through this. They allowed themselves to mourn together. You know, if you just see it as two sides in conflict, there is no we in it. But here they created that. And they used grief to do that. You know, Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama wrote a book called The Book of Joy, which, by the way, you can get for free. It's on the internet. And one of the things they talk about, I'm just going to paraphrase it, is that laughter and grief are the two sides of the same coin of love. You know, in grief, there's love. In joy, there's love. And they go together. And one of the ministers said, it wasn't about making it okay, it was just about the power of mourning together. That can come over divisions. We went to a funeral yesterday, and a woman named Ann Newton, who I work with, and she mentored me on numerous issues, but just believed in community, just believed in community in Button County, and dedicated her life. In fact, she died when she was 91, and was running the Child Protective Service Committee until 2 weeks before she died. She was just that intensely dedicated. So the power of mourning leads to trust. That is a story of joy, that other side of the coin, and inspiration. When people mourn together, there's a powerful sense of community, a powerful experience that quiets fears and provides foundations for later reconciliation. Without that shared emotional experience, really what you get is just an intellectual exercise, a debate, not something that creates community. Mourning leads to a concern for others and their soul, and a motivation to seek social justice. Two very important Christian callings. You know, through love and faith, we can tolerate the discomfort of mourning so that there can be healing. Discomfort and grief becomes the heart and soul of building community love. Grief is critical because of that joy. So you have this thing where there's division, there's competition, there's conflict. Then there's discomfort and recognition. And that feeling of loss of community and love for each other. But that recognition of the loss leads to the restoration. Referring back to the Book of Joy by Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu talks about an African culture where instead of greeting people with "how are you?" or "this is how I am today," the greeting is "how are we?" How are we? It's a powerful question. It'd probably be a really good Quaker query. How are we?
Greg, thank you for your message. And in Greg's message, there's an old adage there. It's more blessed to give than to receive. Very happy. And then his message today, a different way to greet each other. How are we today? How are we today? It just changes one word, but it changes a lot of the meaning. For our closing hymn, let's turn to page 690. You lead it with me. Page 690. And please stand. Let us close this morning with medicinal benediction.
May the Lord watch between me and thee, while we are absent one from